The banquet had 4 movements, and Elira had dreaded the 4th, since the doors of Highfell first swung open. She knew their order, the way she knew her own breath. First, the welcome, while the wine went round and the hall pretended to be glad. Then, the blessing, when old Mirith rose to murmur over the salt with those milk-pale eyes that saw too much. Then the naming of the year's pups. Every litter in Valemore called out and cheered. Every litter but the one the whole kingdom was waiting on. And last, the petition. The movement no one announced, but everyone had come for. The moment Chancellor Selwyn would unfold himself from his seat, smooth as poured oil, and ask aloud the question the High Hall had been holding in its teeth all winter: how long does a Baron Luna keep her crown? Elira sat very straight and counted. 1 movement gone. The wine had come and been drunk, and she had touched her cup to her lips and swallowed nothing. Beneath the long table, hidden by a fall of gray silk, her hand rested flat against her stomach, and under her palms, small, impossible, hers was the secret that could save her or bury her, depending entirely on who learned it first. Myrith rose, spoke over the salt, sat again. The old seer's gaze snagged on Elira as she lowered herself down and held a half-second too long, and it was Elira who looked away first. She should not have come tonight. She had woken at dawn with the cold thing already turning behind her ribs. The pull she had no name for except that it belonged to the curse and not to her. A slow undertow that had grown stronger every day for a month. In exact measure, she was certain, with the thing growing under her hand. As if the two could not both live in one body for long, as if something was being quietly decided. 3. The naming. Bram, the king's beta, read the letters from a long birch scroll, and the hall roared for each small name, and Corvin, she let herself look at him then, once, the way a starving woman lets herself look at bread. Her husband sat at the head of his own table, like something carved to belong there, dark and still, a scar she loved threading pale through one brow. He was not laughing with the others. His eyes had found her down the length of the hall and stayed, the way they always did, as though in a room of 300 wolves, she were the single fixed point he trusted. He had chosen her when the whole realm told him not to. He had never once let her feel what it had cost. Across the hall, Undine of the northern houses watched Elira over the rim of a full cup, with the patient courtesy of a woman who already knew how the night would end. Elira dropped her eyes to her untouched plate. He did not know what she carried. He could never know. Not yet. Not until she understood how to keep them both alive. The undertow tightened. 4. Selwyn rose. He let the silence gather, the master of it, one ringed hand resting light on the table. "My king," he began in that voice, like a palm smoothing a wrinkle from cloth. "The pack has feasted. The pack has been patient." A pause, weighted to the ounce. "Valemore loves its Luna. But love does not fill a cradle, and a throne with no heir is a throne. The winter wolves are already counting the days of the hall tilted." It came the way it had threatened to all evening, only faster, the cold pulse surging up through her at once, the light thinning to silver at its edges, Selwyn's voice stretching long and far away. Elira gripped the table's lip. That, she thought, with the last clear corner of her mind. Not here, not now, not in front of all of them. And then she thought something worse, something that turned her blood to meltwater. For one instant before the dark took her, she heard it, small and quick and terribly loud in the hush, a second heartbeat, not her own, and every alpha in that hall could hear a heartbeat clear across a room. Then the floor rose up to meet her, and Elira of Brackenmere, Luna of Valemore, fell in front of the entire court. She surfaced to lamplight and the smell of crushed yarrow, and for one merciful breath, she did not remember. Then she did. Odalise, the palace healer, sat at the edge of the bed with her sleeves pushed to the elbow and her face carefully, professionally empty. She was the only soul in Valemore who knew. Elira had needed one person, only one, and had chosen the healer for her steady hands and her open contempt of the court. Now those steady hands pressed a cup of something bitter toward Elira's mouth, and her eyes said everything her voice would not, while the door stood open. "You fainted, my lady," Odalus said, pitched for the two maids by the door. "The heat, the crush of people. You must rest. You fell in front of 300 wolves," her eyes said, "and I do not know what any of them heard." Elira drank the bitter thing and said nothing, because there was nothing to say that the whole room would not carry back down the stairs by morning. Morning came gray, and it came for her. They convened in the gray court beneath the old banners, and they made her stand for it, which was its own kind of answer. Selwyn did not gloat. That was the unbearable thing about him. He never needed to. He spoke of Vile Moor with the tenderness of a man discussing an ailing parent. The border packs restless, the winter wolves testing the northern passes. 3 hard years and no heir to steady any of it. He spoke of duty. He spoke of the hollowing, the old barrenness that the seer Myrith had named upon the royal line, years before Elira ever came to court. The curse the whole kingdom believed had ended Corvin's blood, with Corvin himself. "None here doubt the king's heart," Selwyn said, and turned and let his gaze come to rest on Elira, like a hand laid on a scale. "Nor the Luna's. A barren union is no sin. My lords, it is only a fact." He let that settle. Then he named the answer, the severance rite. Old law, older than any wolf in the room, a clean unmaking of a fruitless bond, so that an alpha might take a second who could give the pack what the first could not. He did not propose to cast the Luna out, of course not. He was far too clever for a cruelty that showed. She would keep her rooms, her title, her honored place at court. She would simply keep them beside the woman who did the one thing she could not, and he had, the woman, ready. Ondine rose from among the highborn without being asked, because she had been asked long ago, in 100 quiet rooms Elira had never been invited into. She was everything the court had wanted for Corvin and been denied. Old northern blood, a bloodline thick with heirs, a face like the first hard frost morning of the year. She inclined her head to Elira, with flawless, murdering courtesy. "I would count it an honor to serve the pack," Ondine said. And my Luna, was a blade slid in smiling. Around the gray court, heads bent together and away. She watched it happen, that small, practiced tilt of a court, deciding which way the wind had finally turned. A season ago these same lords had bowed to her at the door. Now their eyes slid over her and passed already fitting the northern woman into her place, and not one of them thought to wonder whether the barren Luna might have anything left to say. Elira stood through all of it with her spine straight, and her face still, because she had learned long ago that stillness was the one armor they could not strip from her. Behind the still face, the cruelty of it turned and turned. She could end this. She could open her mouth in front of the entire gray court and say the 3 words that would snap Selwyn's petition, like dry kindling, "I am with child," and watch the blood drain out of Ondine's perfect face. And it would cost her the child before the next moon rose. She knew because Myrith's own scrolls had told her. Across the long nights she had spent hunting a way out. The hollowing did not merely make the royal line barren. It guarded the barrenness. Let the king acknowledge an heir. Let him claim it, name it so much as truly believe in it, and the curse would take its due, and the cradle would stand empty after all. The only road through was the one door she could not force him toward. He had to hold to her freely, choose her over the empty cradle, while believing to his bones that she could never fill it. Love the barren woman, and only then would the barrenness lift. It was a lock, built to keep itself locked, a cure, shaped exactly like the one thing she could never let herself ask for. So she could not tell him. She could only stand here and let them name her hollow while she carried the heir to his throne beneath her folded hands. "The rite will be spoken at the hollow moon," Selwyn finished. "Should the king consent, 6 weeks hence?" He bowed, grave and gentle. "The pack will thank you, my lords, for your courage in a hard season. 6 weeks." Behind her ribs the undertow pulled, slow and certain, and Alira understood with a cold falling in her stomach that it was pulling toward the same moon. Whatever was being decided inside her body would be decided by then too. She looked for Corvin and could not find his eyes. He was staring at the table, jaw set hard as river stone, and he had not said a single word. For 3 days, Corvin said nothing, and the court took his silence for consent and grew bold on it. Undine was seen walking the north gallery on Selwyn's arm. A seamstress arrived, unbidden, to measure the Luna's rooms for the changes to come. A steward asked Alira, with exquisite apology, whether she might prefer the east apartments, which caught the morning sun so nicely. She bore all of it, and counted moons, and did not sleep. On the 3rd night, he came to her. Not to the great shared chamber they kept for the court's benefit and almost never used, but to her own small rooms alone, unannounced, the way he had in the early days before crowns turned everything into a performance. He shut the door with his back against it and looked at her, and for a moment, neither of them was a king or a Luna, only 2 people the world was trying to pry apart. "They think I'm going to do it," he said. "I know, Elira." He crossed the room. He was not a man built for careful things, a soldier long before he was ever a king. All shoulders and old scars made for the blunt work of holding a border, and yet he took her hands as though they were the last unbroken things in the world. "Look at me, I am not going to do it." Something in her chest cracked, that she had been holding shut for weeks. She had braced for his surrender. She had told herself she could survive it, that she would swallow the severance, keep her secret, and find some other road. She had not braced for this. "You have to give the pack an heir," she made herself say. "Corvin, the winter wolf, will find every throne empty in the end," he said. "I would sooner leave them a strong Luna and an honest line that stops than a cradle full of Selwyn's arithmetic." His thumb moved once over her knuckles. "They wanted Undine for me. You know that. Old blood, northern blood, a treaty in a wedding gown. My council had the whole of it arranged before I ever rode down to Brackenmere." She did know. She had lived it. The low-born border girl, the high court had swallowed like a stone, the scandal Corvin had chosen with both eyes open, the mate no one at Highfell had ever quite forgiven her for being. She still remembered the first council after their mating. The silence when he had led her in by the hand, the way the northern lords had taken in her muddied hem and her borderland vowels, and decided, all at once and without a single word, that she was a mistake he would in time grow tired of. 3 years on, they were still waiting for him to tire. "I rode to your father's holdfast to sign a grazing treaty," he said, and the corner of his mouth turned helpless, the way it did only ever for her. "Then I stayed 9 days, inventing reasons not to leave. I chose you when choosing you. Cost me half my court, and I have not spent 1 hour since wishing I'd chosen the arithmetic instead." His voice dropped, rough. "I am not going to unchoose you now, because a chancellor can count to 0. And here was the moment the cruelty of it nearly broke her open, because he was laying down his throne's whole future for a barren wife, and the barren wife was not barren at all. And if she loved him the way she wanted to, if she told him the truth to spare him the sacrifice, so she did the only thing left to her. She stepped into him and pressed her face to his chest, where he could not read it. He folded around her at once, one broad hand spread between her shoulder blades, his chin coming down to rest in her hair. She felt him breathe. She felt the great slow drum of his heart beneath her cheek, steady as a forge, and she let herself have it. Just for a moment, just this. He went still, not the stillness of comfort, the stillness of a wolf that has heard something move in the dark. "Alira," he said it slowly, and she felt the low frown travel through his chest before she heard it. He drew back an inch, head tilting, that hunting focus sliding across his face, the alpha in him surfacing, the ear that could pick a single heartbeat out of a crowded hall now bending, without his knowing why, toward the small warm space between their bodies. Be still a moment, I thought I heard. Her blood turned to river ice. I'm only tired, she said, far too fast, and she pulled his mouth down to hers to stop his ears with something else. He let her. He kissed her back, like a man come in out of a long cold, and the dangerous focus melted out of him, and she told herself that the wild slam of her own heart would cover whatever lay beneath it. When they broke apart, he set his brow against hers and murmured that he would break Selwyn's petition in open council at week's end, that she should trust him, that he had held far worse lines than this one. He left near midnight, lighter than he had come. Alira stood a long while in the dark after the door closed, both hands pressed flat over the secret in her body, and understood exactly how the next 6 weeks would run. He would fight the entire court to keep her, and every time he drew her close enough to feel loved, he would come one heartbeat nearer to hearing the truth that would cost her everything she was trying to save. 6 weeks to be loved, well enough to break a curse, and to never once let herself be held long enough for it to be heard. She almost laughed at the shape of it, standing there alone. It was not a funny shape at all. Task. She did not yet know that Selwyn, denied his clean and lawful right, had already begun to plan a dirtier one. At week's end, Corvin kept his word, and he kept it where every wolf in Valemore could watch him do it. He called the Grey Court to full session, and let Selwyn lay the whole case out again. The barren years, the restless border, the waiting cradle. And he let the lords murmur their agreement, and he let Undine sit, gracious and ready at the front of the hall like a gift already wrapped in ribbon. He let it all build. Then he stood, and the murmuring died, the way a wind dies before a storm. I have heard the petition, Corvin said. I have weighed it, and I refuse it. The hall did not breathe. There will be no severance while I hold this throne. I took one mate before the pack in the moon, and I will take no other, heir or no heir. His voice did not rise. It had never needed to. If the strength of Valemore depends on the shape of my marriage bed, then Valemore was weak long before my Luna ever came to it. We will find our strength elsewhere, my lords. This is finished. He did not wait to be argued with. He came down from the dais, and he crossed the whole length of the Grey Court to where Lyra stood among the wolves, who had spent a month deciding she was disposable, and he took her hand in front of all of them, and he let her out. The great doors closed on a silence with a crack running through it. Behind them, the hall did not stay silent for long, and what she heard was not the outrage Selwyn had counted on. A handful of the older lords, bordermen who remembered Corvin the soldier, before Corvin the king, thumped the tables in the low rolling way. Wolves cheer their own. It was not many. But for the first time Alira understood that the court was not one animal but two, and that the king had just shown the smaller, quieter half of it exactly where he stood. Selwyn did not protest. That was the thing she would remember later, that he only inclined his head, gracious in defeat, and let the king have his moment. A man does not argue with a wall. A man waits for the frost to do the work for him. She should have felt only triumph. She felt it, a fierce, bright rush of it, the first in weeks. But beneath the triumph ran the cold thread that never left her now, because every wall he tore down for the barren wife was a wall he would not have spent on her had he known what she truly was. That night, he stayed. They sat by her fire the way they used to, before crowns made everything a performance, and for a little while it was almost simple. He told her how Selwyn's face had looked when the word refuse landed. She laughed, really laughed, from somewhere deep and long shut, and the sound surprised them both. He reached over and tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear, and his hand lingered at her jaw, and his eyes moved across her face, like a man reading a page he had loved for years and meant to love for decades more. "Come here," he said low, and she wanted to. That was the cruelty at the center of the whole arrangement. She wanted to close the space between them more than she wanted her next breath, and the space between them was the only thing keeping her child alive. Let him draw her against his chest. Let him go quiet, and warm, and listening, and the great patient ear of the alpha would find the second small drum beating under her heart, and it would all come undone. So she went to him, but she kept her cheek from his chest. She tucked herself under his arm, with her back to his side, her head on his shoulder, where the only heartbeat he could hear was his own. He noticed everything. "You've been holding yourself apart from me," he said into her hair, not an accusation, almost a question. "I've been frightened," she said, which was the truest thing she had told him in a month. His arm tightened. "I know. I'll make it right, Elira, I swear it to you." And he believed it, and she loved him so fiercely in that moment that it felt like a wound, because he thought the danger was Selwyn, and the danger was her, sitting in the curve of his arm, with a secret that could undo them both. It was the seer, who nearly undid her. She had gone down to the still room the next morning for the bitter tea Odalys brewed against the sickness, and Myrith was waiting on the stair, though no one had told her Elira would pass. She always seemed to be waiting on the stair. The old seer's eyes were the color of skimmed milk and had not seen the shape of the world in 30 years, and yet they turned to Elira with the dreadful accuracy of a key finding its lock. "They call the line hollow," Myrith said without greeting. "The king grieves an empty house." She smiled, and it was not unkind, and it was the most frightening thing Elira had ever seen. "But you and I know the house is not empty. Do we not, child?" Elira could not speak. The old woman reached out and, unerring, laid 2 dry fingers against the gray silk over Elira's stomach. "Small drum," she murmured, "beating so. Guard it well. There are ears at this court that would give a great deal to still it," and one of them made the silence you were told was fate. Her blind gaze rose to Elira's face. "Come to me before the hollow moon. There is more you must know than you have time to learn." Then she withdrew her hand and turned and felt her way down the stair, as though she had said nothing at all, leaving Elira frozen on the step, with her heart slamming against her ribs, and the whole shape of her secret suddenly, terribly, known to someone else. Barred from the clean and lawful right, Selwyn simply changed the weather. He could not unmake the marriage, so he set about unmaking the wife, and he did it the way he did everything, never with his own hands. A word here, a silence there. Within the week, the corridors of Highfell had grown a new story, and it traveled the way the ugliest stories always travel, on soft voices and behind raised hands. That the king was not merely stubborn but bewitched. That the border girl had bound him with some low hedge magic out of Brackenmere. That a strong pack does not let itself be ruled from a barren bead. Elira felt the court turn its shoulder to her by degrees. Lords who had bowed now found the windows fascinating whenever she passed. A cluster of high-born women fell silent when she entered the solar, and stayed silent, smiling, until she left again. Once, walking the long gallery, she heard a young wife murmur to another, "They say he keeps her out of pity now," and heard the other laugh, and kept her chin level and her steps even, and did not let a flicker of it reach her face. She had long since learned that a still face was the one thing in that palace no one had ever managed to take off her. The worst of it always wore a smile. At the midweek gathering, Undine crossed the whole length of the solar to press a cup of warmed wine into Elira's hands, loud enough for the room, all tender concern. "You look so tired, my Luna," she said, cupping Elira's cheek like a fond sister. "You mustn't let the waiting wear you down so. Some women simply aren't made for it. Let others carry what you cannot." She patted Elira's hand and drifted away on a soft tide of sympathetic murmurs, and every woman in that solar understood precisely what had been said. Elira drank the wine. It was the only way to keep her face from doing something that could not be taken back. And the north was stirring. Bram brought Corvin the reports, and Corvin brought his grim face to her rooms. Undine's kin in the high passes had let it be known that their loyalty had always been to the promise of a match, and a king who spurned that promise might find his northern border very lonely, come winter. The winter wolves would hear of it, within the moon. Selwyn had not needed to lift a sword. He had only to let the walls lean and wait for the roof to come down on the barren queen who had held them apart. Elira bore all of it. She had borne worse. What she could not bear was her own body turning traitor. It took her on the 9th day, in the long gallery, alone. The undertow, which had been a slow, cold pull for a month, closed its fist. Without warning. A wrenching deep behind her hips, a wave of cold so total the daylight went to gray ash, her knees striking the stone before she knew she had fallen. She curled around the pane, with both arms wrapped over her middle, over the child, thinking with a white, blank terror, no, no, not this. You do not get to take this from me. And then, as suddenly as it had seized her, it eased, and left her shaking on the flagstones in a cold sweat, her heart going like a hunted thing. Odalise found her, got her up, got her hidden, got her behind a locked door, and pressed her ear and her hands to Elira's middle for a long, long time, while Elira lay rigid and prayed to gods she was no longer sure had ever been listening. "The child lives," the healer said at last, and Elira sobbed once, ugly with relief. But Odalise did not smile. She sat back and wiped her hands and wore the face Elira had learned to dread, the honest one. "My lady, I will not lie to you. You are past the age of comfort. Now, that was not your body, that was the curse." She chose her words like stones laid one by one across deep water. "The hollowing was laid to keep this line empty, and this child is a thing it was built to prevent. It is trying to correct the error. Every day it grows stronger, and every day the child grows too, and they cannot both keep growing in one body. I have felt the pull sharpen. It sharpens toward the hollow moon. Then, after the moon, Lyra began. After the moon, there may be nothing left to save," Odalise said very gently. "I do not think the child will reach the hollow moon at all, not unless the thing closing around it is broken first." The floor of the world dropped away beneath her. 6 weeks had been her enemy. Now 6 weeks was a mercy she would not be granted. The only thing that could save her baby was the breaking of the hollowing, and the only thing that could break the hollowing was Corvin's freely given love for a wife he believed could give him nothing, a slow and delicate and impossible flower she had been trying to coax into bloom while the frost came down harder every night. She did not have 6 weeks. She did not know how many days she had. She lay a long while on the cold flags. After the healer had gone, one hand curved over the small life the whole court had just agreed did not exist, and let herself feel the full cruelty of the shape she was caught in. To save her child, she had to make her husband love her. To make him love her, she had to let him close. To let him close was to let him hear the second heartbeat, and if he heard it, if he so much as believed in it before the curse gave way, the working would reclaim the very child it had failed to prevent. Every road to safety ran straight off the one cliff she could not walk. She was being asked to light a fire in a room full of powder, quickly, and somehow not be burned. "How long?" Elira whispered. "Make him love you quickly, my lady," was all she said. "However you must, and pray it is a kind of quick the world will allow you." She went up to the seer that night, because she had nowhere else left to go. Myrith's chambers sat at the top of the old west tower, up a stair that everyone at Highfell avoided out of a superstition they would all have denied having. The old woman was waiting, of course she was waiting, with a low fire lit and 2 cups poured that neither of them touched. "Sit," Myrith said, "and listen, because I will say it only once, and the saying of it is dangerous for us both." And she told her. The hollowing was no fate. Myrith had never prophesied it, she had witnessed it, which was a different and far more dangerous thing. 19 years ago a working had been laid upon the royal line, a slow, patient, ruinously expensive magic, the kind that is only ever bought and never learned, a curse to close the royal womb line and let the great house of Valemore die quietly of its own emptiness, so that when the last king fell heirless, the crown would roll clean and bloodless. To the strongest blood still standing, the seer had felt it done from across the mountains. and she had been made to understand, with great courtesy and greater menace, that a wise old woman who wished to keep her tower and her tongue would call it a prophecy and let the whole pack believe the gods had done it. Who? Elira said. Her voice did not sound like her own. Who bought it? You already know, Myrith said. You have watched him smile at you across a hall for 3 years, Selwyn. Of course, it was Selwyn. He had hollowed a bloodline 19 years before, and then simply waited for it to fall into his lap. And Corvin's stubborn refusal to die childless on schedule was the one thing in 2 decades that had ever gone wrong with the plan. The child in you should never have existed, Myrith went on, softer now. That is precisely why it is in danger. Love slipped through a lock that was built to hold it shut, your love and his, and made a thing the curse was raised to forbid. Now the working means to correct itself, as I think your healer has already told you. Her blind eyes found Elira's face exactly. Hear me, for this is the whole of your hope. There is one way to unmake a bought curse by hand. The one who paid for it may call it back. Selwyn never will. So you are left with the only other door, the door the caster could not lock, because he did not believe such a thing was possible in a marriage of convenience. The alpha must hold to his barren mate freely, wanting nothing from her but her. Do that, truly, all the way down, with nothing left to gain. And the working breaks of its own logic, for it will have failed at the one thing it was ever made to do. She leaned nearer, and her milk-pale eyes held a warning older than the tower itself. And mark this, for you may need it when I am not near to say it again. A bought curse, and any craft cut from the same buying are kin. Break the root, and whatever grew from it, grows weak, along with it. Whatever else these people take from you, remember their malice is all one tree, and a tree can be felled at the root. I am trying, Elira said, and heard how thin it sounded in that cold, high room. There isn't time, then waste none of it, Myrith said, and go carefully down my stair. You are not the only one in this palace running out of moons. Elira left the tower with her head full of it, and her feet finding the dark stair by memory. And that was how she came, silent, upon the 2 voices in the gallery below. She knew them both at once, and stopped dead against the cold stone. Cannot wait for the moon. Selwyn, low and quick, every drop of the oil gone out of his voice now that he believed himself unheard. He will not yield, and the North will not wait on him. If the king still holds the throne at the hollow moon, we have lost the whole game. Then he should not hold it. Undine, bored, almost. You have hunters, an alpha in his own hall. No, it must look like the border, a beast. Nothing, anyone, can name. A pause. There is a way, a blade out of the north, silver, worked, quenched in the same craft that hollowed him. It will not kill him cleanly. A clean death makes a martyr. It will cut the wolf out of him. And a king who cannot shift is no king. The pack will set him down themselves and thank us for the mercy. And you will have your widower's throne by spring without a single drop of blood on our hands that anyone alive can name. And the girl is nothing, Selwyn said. The girl is barren and friendless, and will be no one's concern in this world at all. A footstep scraped, one of them turning. Elira went rigid in the black mouth of the stairwell, not breathing, her own pulse suddenly so loud in her ears that she was certain it would give her away as the small hidden drum never could. A long, terrible moment. Then, Undine's voice, again, unhurried, drifting off along the gallery. See that it's done before the moon. I have waited long enough to be someone's first choice, and I have no patience left to wait on a barren girl dying of natural causes. Their footsteps faded, but not before they had passed close enough to the foot of the stair for her to have reached out and touched the men who meant to unmake her husband. Elira stood in the dark with her hand pressed hard over her own mouth and her whole future rearranging itself in the space of 10 heartbeats. They meant to cut the wolf out of her husband. They meant to do it soon. And they thought her nothing, which was she realized as the cold settled into her bones. Very nearly the only advantage she had left in the entire world. She did not go to Corvin. She could not without telling him why. And why led straight down to the child, and the child was the one thing she could not name aloud without ending it. So she went back to her rooms, and she lay awake until the gray dawn, and she began, coldly and carefully, to plan. For 3 days after, Corvin would not be alone with her, and Elira nearly went mad, trying to understand why. At first she told herself she'd imagined it. He was busy. The north was a fire that wanted hourly tending. But then the nights came and went, and he did not come with them, and when she sought him out, he was gentle and grave, and somehow gone behind his own eyes, and he found reasons, good ones, kingly ones, to keep a room's width between them and never once close it. Once in open court, she had gone to stand at his right hand, where Luna stands, and he had, with the smallest shift of one shoulder, turned a half-degree away from her. It was nothing, it was everything. The Lord saw it. She watched them see it, watched the calculation ripple down the length of the hall. There, at last, the frost. And she had to go on, standing at his side wearing her still face, while her husband laid, brick by public brick, the very abandonment the whole court had spent a month praying for. That night, she wept where no one could hear, not because he had been cruel, for he was never cruel, but because he had been so convincing, and she did not know that it was a performance, and the not knowing was carving her hollow faster than any curse ever could. She did not know that Bram had come to him in the dark with a hunter's rumor and a bad feeling in his gut. She did not know that Corvin had spent those 3 sleepless days staring at a map of the passes and arriving, by his own straight soldier's road, at a decision that the surest way to keep the blade off his wife was to make her look worthless to the men who would use her against him. To be seen to cool toward the barren queen, to be seen to waver at last. To let Selwyn believe her grip on him was finally loosening, so that when the strike came, and Corvin was certain now that it would come for him alone and leave her standing clear of it. He was trying, with everything in him, to save her life. She thought he was leaving her. And so on the 3rd night, desperate, with Odalis's words beating in her skull, make him love you quickly, and the undertow gnawing at the small life she carried, Elira did the one thing she had sworn she would never do. She went to him, and she reached for the closeness she had spent a month refusing. She came to his chamber unbidden. She crossed to where he stood at the black window, and she put her hands flat against his chest, and she turned her face up to his, and this time she did not hide her cheek from his heart, did not care in that moment for the terrible risk of it, because the greater terror now was the cold that had crept into her marriage. "Whatever it is," she said, "whatever they've made you believe, whatever you think you're protecting me from, don't come back to me, stay with me tonight. Just this, please." For one heartbeat, she felt him waver. His hands rose to her arms, his breath went ragged in his chest under her palms. She felt the want in him, plain as a struck flame, and her own heart leapt so hard it hurt. "Now please, let it be now." And then he set her back from him. Gently, firmly, to arm's length, and then past it. "Not tonight," he said. And his voice was steady in a way that cost him more than she would understand for a long time yet. "Elira, there are things I have to see to. Go and sleep in your own rooms." The words fell on her like cold water off a winter roof. She stepped back. She made herself nod. She would not beg twice. She had that much of herself left. But inside, everything she had been holding together came quietly, completely apart, because she had reached for him with her whole self and her whole hope, and he had put her aside, and there was only one thing in the world that could mean. The court had worn him down at last. The barren wife had become a weight, and he had begun, however kindly, however gently, to set it down. Everyone had promised her this day would come. Now it had, and it had come in the cruelest possible hour, with a child slipping away inside her for want of the very warmth he had just refused to give. She had staked the last of her pride on a single reach across a single room, because his freely given warmth was the only medicine left in all the world for the thing taking her child, and he had handed it back to her, folded and kind, like a coat she had left behind on a chair. There was no second dose of it, and no time in which to find another. She did not weep until she reached her own door. Then she leaned her back against it in the dark, and pressed both hands over her middle, with a small drum beat on. Fainter now, she was sure of it. Fainter, and she understood that she was going to lose everything she loved, and that there was nothing left in her with which to stop it. "I'm sorry," she whispered to the child. "I'm so sorry." I tried. What she could not know was that he had very nearly broken, that when she pressed herself against him and asked him to stay, the wolf in him, still his, then, still whole, had risen so hard and so fast that holding still had felt like holding a door against a flood, that he had set her back to arm's length, not because he wanted the distance, but because he could feel exactly how little of it he had left in him, and one more breath of her would have ended his resolve, and he was certain of it, her safety along with it. He had done the hardest thing he had ever done, and he had done it entirely for love, and from where she stood, it looked exactly like the opposite of love. That was Selwyn's cruelest craft of all, not the curse, not the blade, but this. He had built a trap in which the kindest thing a man could do was indistinguishable from the coldest. Across the sleeping palace at his own black window, Corvin stood with her warmth still on his hands, and hated himself, and told himself it was worth it and believed it, and was wrong. It came on the fourth night, and Elira was the one who walked into it. She could not sleep. She had not truly slept since the tower, and somewhere past midnight, the fear at last outgrew her pride. She could not warn him of the blade without unspooling the whole secret, and the secret led down to the child, but neither could she lie in the dark and let the silver find him, while she said nothing. So she rose and went through the sleeping palace toward his chamber, half-formed words on her lips, and she pushed open his door onto the very thing she had been trying to outrun. There were 3 of them. Dark-clothed, quick, already inside, 1 at the window, 2 across the room, and Corvin up out of his bed, bare-chested and roaring, a wolf half-risen in his throat, magnificent and furious and unarmed. Steel flashed gray-white in the moonlight, not steel-silver, worked with something that hurt the eye to look at, exactly as the gallery had promised. She did not decide to scream his name. It tore out of her. Corvin turned toward the sound, toward the door, toward her, because of course he did, because in a room full of killers, his first thought was still the woman standing in it, and in turning, he opened his flank, and the nearest man drove the silver blade toward the space where a king's heart should be, and Elira stood in the line of it, behind him, framed in the doorway, exactly where a second thrust would land. Corvin saw it. She watched him see it, watched the whole, cold calculation cross his face in less than a single breath, and he did the one thing the man she had married had ever truly known how to do. He put himself in the way. He caught the assassin's arm and turned his own body into the blow, and the silver went into him instead, high in the shoulder, and the sound he made was nothing she had ever heard a living thing make. Not pain. A great tearing howl that began as a wolf's and ended as a man's, as though something vast were being pulled up out of him by the roots. Then Bram was there, and the guard at his back, and the night dissolved into shouting, and steel, and boots. It was over, almost before she understood it had begun. 2 of the attackers dead, 1 gone through the window, into the dark, and Corvin on his knees, on the cold floor with his hand clamped over his shoulder, and the wound bleeding dark between his fingers. And his eyes. His eyes were the worst of all of it, wide, lost, reaching for something inside himself that had stopped answering. "It's quiet," he said. He sounded like a child woken in the night. Elira, it's gone quiet. She was on the floor with him before she knew she'd moved, her hands over his. The silver blade kicked far across the room. Odala's already shoving through the press of bodies at the door. What's quiet? Elira begged. Corvin. What, my wolf? He whispered. I can't hear him. I can't hear anything at all. They cleared the room at last, all but Odalise and Bram, and the healer's face, when she peeled back the ruined cloth, told Elira the truth before the words did. Curse forged, Odalise said, low and grim, silver quenched in a working. I've heard of such things, I never thought to see one. She pressed clean linen hard against the wound, and Corvin shuddered, but did not flinch. The flesh will heal, but it did not cut for the flesh. It cut for the wolf, and the wolf is severed, not slain, I think. Not slain, but shut off, from you. Behind a door, I do not know how to open. You may not shift again, my king. You may not hear the pack, nor run nor call, I am sorry. I am so sorry. The silence that followed was total. Elira looked at her husband. This man built, like the roots of a mountain. This alpha, who had held the border with his teeth, kneeling on his own floor with the wolf carved out of him, and she saw with terrible clarity exactly what the court would make of it by morning. Selwyn had been right about all of it. A king who cannot shift is no king. The lords would not even need to be told. They would smell the lack in him. By the next moon, they would set Corvin down as easily as taking off a coat, and there would be no war and no blood that anyone could name, only a quiet, powerless man and his barren wife swept off into some far room to be forgotten, if they were permitted to live that long. She would not permit it. Something in Elira that had spent 3 years bowing and enduring and keeping its face still stood up inside her, and did not intend to sit back down. She had a husband bleeding on the floor, a child slipping away under her heart, a curse strangling them both, and a chancellor who thought her nothing. Nothing was a place to hide from. Nothing was a place to move from. Bram? Her voice came out level and cold and certain, and the big beta blinked at the sound of it. How many men in this palace would you trust with the king's life against Selwyn's coin? 6, Bram said slowly. Perhaps 8. Then we leave tonight with the 8, before the court wakes and does its arithmetic. She was already moving, already gathering, already Luna, in a way she had never once let herself be at Highfell. We go to Brackenmere. It's mine, it's hidden, and there is not a soul in that valley who owes Selwyn a copper. He recovers there, out of reach, and we decide what comes next, where the walls do not have his ears. Corvin caught her wrist. His grip had lost none of its old strength, only the thing behind it was gone. You should not tie yourself to a sinking king, he said hoarsely. Elira, let them have me. Take yourself somewhere safe. Be quiet and let me save your life, she said. The way you just saved mine. His fevered eyes searched her face. And then they drifted, unfocusing, and his head tipped, and that old, hunting stillness came over him even now, even ruined, the ear turning, catching, in the moment before the dark took him, something small and quick and doubled. 2, he murmured, wondering. Half gone already. I can hear. There are 2, Elira. 2 hearts. Then he slid down into unconsciousness and did not finish, and Elira knelt frozen over him with her secret hanging in the air 1 inch from the light, and no time at all, to do anything but gather him up and carry him out into the night. Brackenmere took them in the way the border takes in its own, without a question, without a bow, without the faintest interest in what the High Court might think about any of it. They came down out of the passes at dawn, 8 exhausted men, a fevered king, and a Luna, who had not slept in 2 days. Her people met them at the holdfast gate with drawn blades that lowered the instant they saw her face. By nightfall, Corvin lay abed in the room she had been born in, under her mother's old furs, and the whole valley had closed around them like a fist. No Highfell rumor climbed those passes. No chancellor's coin bought anything in that valley. And for the first time in 3 years, Illyra breathed. Corvin did not. The fever broke on the third day and left something worse behind it, a silence in him that had nothing to do with his throat. The wound healed clean, as Odalise had promised. He could walk, could lift, could do everything a strong man does. But he would stand at the window for hours, with his head tipped in that old listening way, waiting for a voice that never came, and when he finally lowered his head, the loss on his face was a thing she could hardly stand to look at. "I keep reaching for him," he said once. Not to her exactly, to the cold glass, 50 times a day, like a tongue going back to a lost tooth. "He is simply not there. I have been a wolf since before I could walk, Illyra. I do not know what I am now. You are my husband," she said. That has not moved an inch. He turned and looked at her, as though she had said something, in a language he was too tired to translate. And behind her own steady face, the undertow pulled, quieter than in the gallery, but there, always there, patient, dragging at the small life she carried a little harder with every passing day. So she set about showing him instead of telling him. She could not give him back his wolf, so she gave him her valley. She took him out among her people, not as a king, for Brackenmere had never had much use for kings, but as a pair of good shoulders in a hard season. There was a fence down along the high pasture. She put him to mending it. There was the spring hauling. The valley's old men could no longer manage. She put him to that too, and a strange thing happened to the wolfless king, who had been so certain he was nothing now. The border folk did not know to pity him. They had never heard his wolf. They saw only a big, quiet man who could lift what needed lifting, and who mended a fence, square and true. And they were glad of him, and they told him so, plainly and slowly, a day at a time. Something came back into his shoulders that the silver had cut out. In the evenings they sat by the fire, in the small room, and talked the way they used to, behind no screen and under no watching eyes, and it was, she would think later, the happiest stretch of her whole life, balanced on the very edge of the worst. And because she owed him something true, and because he had given up a throne and a wolf for her, and deserved at least a piece of the reason, she told him part of it. "The barrenness," she said one night, watching the fire so she would not have to watch his face. "It isn't yours. It never was. It was made, Corvin. Bought and laid on your line, 19 years ago, by a patient man who wanted the crown to fall to stronger blood. Myrith never foresaw it. She witnessed it, and was frightened into calling it fate. She made herself say the name. Selwyn hollowed your house. Everything they have done to us since grew from that one seed." She felt him go very still beside her. When she dared a glance, his jaw was set in the old hard way, but his eyes, when they came to her, held no anger, only wonder. "All these years," he said slowly, "I believed the gods had closed my line. I made my peace with dying the last of my name, and it was a man I've dined beside a long breath. How long have you known this?" "Not long," she lied, and hated the taste of it, and steered him gently on. "It changes nothing we have to do. But I could not let you go on believing it was fate. You have grieved enough for something that was only ever a crime." He reached over and took her hand, and turned it in his, and looked at it as though it were the answer to a question he had been asking for years. "You are the strangest comfort," he said quietly. "You bring me the worst news I have ever heard, and somehow I feel lighter than I have in a decade." One side of his mouth tugged upward, helpless, in a way she had never once seen him give to anyone else. "I chose well at your father's holdfast. I have always known it. I know it more with every day. I have nothing left but you, nothing left but you." There it was. The thing the curse had been built to make impossible, growing quietly in a border valley while the frost came down. A king with no wolf, no throne, no earthly hope of an heir, holding his barren wife's hand and calling her enough. She almost told him then. The whole of it rose in her throat. "I am not barren. I never was. Your child is under my heart this very moment, and it is slipping away, and only your love can save it." And she bit it back so hard, she tasted blood, because the curse had not broken that she knew of. So she only turned her hand in his, and held on. He went still. The fire popped. Somewhere out in the dark, a nightbird called. And Corvin's head tipped, slowly, in the old listening way. But this was not the empty reaching she had watched for a week. This was the other thing, the hunting stillness. His brows drew down and his gaze dropped, unerring, to the space between them, to her, to the middle of her, where her free hand had drifted without her ever meaning it. There it is again, he said softly, not to the glass this time. To her, that sound, I heard it the night I fell, and I told myself it was the fever talking. His eyes came up to her face, and there was something new in them, something waking. Elira, be still. I am not mad, and my wolf is gone, and I can still hear it. He pressed his hand, very gently, over hers, over the small warm curve she had hidden beneath gray silk and loose border wool and 3 long years of learning how to disappear. "There are 2 hearts in you," Corvin whispered, "aren't there? For one horrible heartbeat." Elira could not breathe. He knew. He had said it aloud. 2 hearts. The one thing that was never, ever to be named. The acknowledgement the curse had been waiting 19 years to punish. She had carried this child through fire and flight, and a strangling working precisely so that he would never know, before it was safe. And now he knew, and the claws would take its due. And she had doomed her own child with a held hand beside a border fire. And then she felt it. Or rather she felt the absence of it, the cold, the undertow, the slow pitiless pull that had been dragging at the life inside her for 6 weeks, sharpening, every day, clawing toward the hollow moon. It was gone. She reached for it the way Corvin kept reaching for his wolf, and where it had always been, there was only warmth, only quiet, only the small quick drum beating strong and unafraid beneath his hand. Gone. When had it gone? She cast back frantic, and landed on his voice. Minutes ago, rough and helpless by the fire. "Nothing left but you. I know it more with every day I have nothing left." A king with no wolf and no crown, and no earthly hope of an heir, holding her hand and calling her enough. He had chosen her wanting nothing, freely, fully, with nothing left to gain in all the world. And the curse, built entirely on the certainty that no man would ever truly love a barren bride he had been saddled with, had failed at the single thing it was made to do. And failing, it had simply died, the way a fire dies when it finally runs out of the thing it burns. The hollowing was broken. It had broken by the fire, in the quiet without either of them seeing it go. And that meant it was safe. That meant the child was safe. That meant she could finally. Elira Corvin's hand had gone rigid over hers, his face caught between wonder and fear. "Say something. Am I mad?" "Tell me you're not mad." The tears came all at once, and she was laughing through them, both her hands closing over his, and pressing it hard against the curve of their child. "You are not mad, Corvin. You never were. There are 2. A sob tore out of her, pure and unbearable, and glad. "I have been carrying your heir since the first frost. Since before the banquet. I have been carrying our child this whole time." She watched it land on him. Watched him go white, then grope for it, then fail to hold it at all. "That's not." His voice cracked straight down the middle. "Elira, my line is hollow. It isn't possible. It was never the gods, I told you." And love slipped the lock. The words tumbled out, now, all of them at once. 3 years and 6 weeks of them. She told him about the faint, the second heartbeat she had heard as she fell, the undertow that had been trying to reclaim what the curse forbade. She told him about the claws, that to name the child, to know it, before the curse broke would have doomed it. That she had held her silence to keep it breathing. That she had let him grieve, had let him give up his throne, and his wolf believing he would get nothing back. because the only thing in the world that could break the curse was exactly that, him choosing her while he believed she was empty. And she told him the miracle at the heart of it, that he had loved her enough, wolf-less and throneless and hopeless, to unmake 19 years of patient malice without ever knowing he had done it. She understood now, too, the thing that had so unsettled him by the fire, how he could still hear the small heart with his wolf cut clean away. The wolf sense hears the blood of the pack, but their child had been his blood, long before it was ever his pack, and no blade had ever been forged that could cut a father off from that. It broke tonight, she whispered. Right here, by this fire, when you said you had nothing left but me, that is when it let go. I felt it go. The child is safe now, Corvin, it's safe. We're safe. For a long moment he could not speak at all. Then he slid off the bench and onto his knees before her, and he pressed his brow to the curve of her belly. And this Alpha, who had once held a border alone against the winter, who had taken a curse blade without flinching, who had not wept even when they cut the wolf out of him, this man broke and wept. With his arms wrapped around her and his ear pressed to the small drum he had spent a week telling himself he'd imagined. An heir, he said, wrecked, laughing and weeping at once. All this time you were carrying, and I pushed you away. I put you out of my rooms, God's Alira. That night you came to me and you were trying to save me, she said, understanding it fully only as she said it aloud. Weren't you? All that coldness? You were trying to make Selwyn believe you'd given me up, so the blade would only ever come for you. And it nearly cost us everything, he breathed. Everything. He lifted his head, and his eyes were shining and terrible and alive. No more. Whatever comes now, we meet it together. I have nothing left but you. And it turns out, you are the whole of it. The door banged open. Bram stood in it, chest heaving, snow on his shoulders, a hard ride behind him and worse news already spilling out ahead of him. Forgive me. My king, my lady, he gulped air. It's the capital. Selwyn's moved. He's told the pack the king is dead, killed by border raiders, and had himself named regent by nightfall. Ondine's blood is to take the throne at the hollow moon. His eyes found Alira, and the fear in them sharpened into something far worse. And there's word out of Highfell, my lady. He knows. Since you fled, his people have dragged an old whisper back up out of the banquet, an alpha of his, who swore he heard a second heart beating in that hall before you fell, and set it beside a Luna who ran for the mountains, with her own healer, and drawn the only conclusion there is. He's sent men up the passes to be sure there's never a child at all. They're a day behind me. Perhaps less. The warmth of the miracle turned to ice in Alira's chest. The curse was broken. The child was safe from the hollowing. And it had traded one death sentence for another. Because now, the most dangerous thing in all the world, to Selwyn's clean succession, was the very heir she had just been given leave to love, and the only wolf that had ever stood between her and the dark had been cut out of her husband little more than a week before. Corvin was on his feet before Bram had finished, and Alira watched the king pour back into him. But it was the wrong king, not the one who held borders. The one who spent himself to shield the people standing behind him. The one who had put his own body between her and the silver, without a heartbeat's thought. She knew what he was going to say before he said it, and everything in her rose up to stop it. Bram, how many hunters? 12. My king, perhaps more. And I have 8 men and no wolf. Corvin said it flatly, a soldier counting his losses. And then he turned to her, and his face was already made up, already gone, soft and final and unbearable. Alira, listen to me. They are hunting 2 things, a king who came back from the dead, and an heir. If they find both under one roof, neither of them survives it, and Brackenmere burns to the ground for the crime of sheltering us. He took her by the shoulders. So we do not give them both, we give them neither. Corvin, you disappear, he said, Tonight, into the valley, into your own people, a border woman with a border child. No name, no crown, no claim. Selwyn cannot hunt an heir that does not exist. A commoner's babe in a mountain valley lives its whole long life and dies old and warm in its bed. His thumbs moved over her shoulders, gentle and terrible. And I ride out the other way at dawn, loud, seen alive. The dead king, risen, and I lead every hunter in these passes east until they are 100 miles from you, and from him. They want a king to kill. I will give them a good long chase for it. You'll give them you. Elira said, and her voice broke clean through the middle of it. That's what you mean. You mean to let them run you down somewhere. I will never even find your body. I mean to keep my wife and my child alive, he said, with the only thing I have left to spend. There it was. The whole shape of him laid bare in a single sentence. He had given up his crown for her, and his wolf for her, and now he would give up his life for her and their child too. And he had arranged it in his own head, as neat and clean as a battle plan, and he honestly, wholly, believed it was the kindest thing he could possibly do. To strip himself out of their story so that the story might go on without him in it. No, she said low, like a door closing. Elira, be reasonable. You listen to me now. She stepped into him, right into him. The way she had that terrible night he'd set her aside. Only this time she did not reach with need. She reached with iron. I spent 3 years letting a court decide I was nothing. I spent 6 weeks letting a curse decide my child was nothing. I have buried more of myself under stillness and keeping my chin down and doing the reasonable thing than you will ever know, and I am finished with all of it. I did not break a 19-year curse with my bare hands and a held breath to hand you over to a chancellor's hunters, because you have decided. The noble thing is to die alone in a mountain pass. His jaw worked. If I stay, they find us. If they find us, the child, then we do not let them find a frightened man and a hidden woman, she said. We let them find a valley that was ready for them. Something flickered behind his eyes, the soldier catching the scent of a plan on the wind, but it guttered out under the weight of the old wound, the loss he could not yet see past. Elira, he said, and it came out ragged, stripped all the way down to the raw. I have nothing left, no wolf, no throne, no way on this earth to hold a line against 12 armed men. I am not the thing you married. I cannot protect you, and a man who cannot protect his mate and his child is worse than no husband at all. He is a danger to them. His hands tightened, pleading. Now, let me be the one useful thing I can still be. Let me be the bait that draws the wolves off my own door. And there it was, the true bottom of it, lower even than a curse or a silver blade. He did not push her away because he had stopped loving her. He pushed her away because he had decided, standing in the ruins of himself, that his love had become a liability and his life was worth more spent than kept. The kindest man she had ever known, arranging his own erasure and calling it a gift. You are not a danger to us, she said, and her voice cracked, and she let it crack. You are the reason there is an us to be endangered. Do you imagine I would rather have a safe life mourning you than a hard one lived beside you? Do you imagine our child would? You keep trying to hand me a version of this where you are gone, and we are somehow grateful for it. I will not take it from you. I have swallowed every other terrible thing these people have handed me these 3 years with my chin up and my mouth shut, and this is the one I refuse. She took his face in both her hands. You do not get to be noble at me. Not tonight, not about this. Outside, faint and far up the pass, a horn sounded, then another, closer. Bram went to the window and swore under his breath. Torches, my lady. They're not a day behind us. They're an hour. Down the valley a dog began to bark, and then another, the alarm running hold fast to hold fast. Elira heard her people rising in the dark, heard doors, heard the scrape of old blades taken down from cold hearths, and understood that Brackenmere had already made its choice, whatever hers turned out to be. The horns answered from higher up the pass. Closer now, cold and certain. Corvin reached for the sword by the door. Not to fight, she understood with a lurch. To go to them. To give himself up loud and living and lead them away before they ever reached the hold-fast wall. His hand closed around the hilt. "Bar the door behind me," he said. "Whatever you hear out there, do not open it." Elira, his voice failed, came back. "Name him something of the border, something of yours, not mine. Let him grow up, never knowing his father was the fool who—" Corvin. He stopped, his hand on the latch, and looked back at her. And Elira understood that the whole of it, the curse, the crown, the wolf, 3 years of stillness and 6 weeks of silence, had come down at last to this one room and this one moment and this one choice, and that the choice was hers. And that she was done, forever, letting anyone else in all the world make it for her. "You are not walking out that door to die for me," Elira said. "Put the sword down, Corvin, and listen." He didn't move. His hand stayed on the latch, his shoulders set against her. A man braced to do a hard and kind thing quickly, before anyone could argue him out of it. So she crossed the room and laid her hand over his on the hilt, and made him look at her. "You think you have nothing left to give me," she said. "You think the wolf was the thing that made you worth keeping. That a king who can't shift and can't hold a line is a burden I'd be better off without. That is the same arithmetic Selwyn does. It is the same arithmetic that court did to me. For 3 years deciding a barren wife was a thing to be quietly set aside for a better one." Her voice shook and then steadied under her. "I know that math, Corvin. I have had it worked on me, and I am telling you to your face that it is wrong. Elira, I did not fall in love with your wolf." The words came out of her clear and certain, the truest thing she had ever spoken. "I did not fall in love with your crown, or your border, or your strength, or any single one of the things the world uses to measure you. I fell in love with the man who stayed 9 days at my father's holdfast, inventing reasons not to leave. I fell in love with the man who put himself in front of a blade without stopping to think. You could lose every last thing they use to name you a king. You already have, and you would still be the only thing I have ever wanted in my life. I have never loved you more than I have loved you in this valley. With your hands full of splinters and nothing left to your name but me." She pressed his hand hard against her heart. "So you do not get to decide you are worth less to me now. That was never yours to decide. It was mine, and I choose you. Wolf or no wolf, king or no king, I choose you." For a moment, the whole world held perfectly still. And then Corvin made a sound. Low, broken, astonished. And somewhere far down inside him, behind the door, the silver had shut. Something answered. She felt it before she saw it. The air changed. The hair rose along her arms. His hand went rigid beneath hers, and his head came up. And his eyes, his tired, grieving, human eyes, flooded all at once with gold. "Elira?" he breathed. "I can hear him? Corvin. I can hear him." It broke out of him half a laugh and half a howl. "He's gods. He's screaming." She would understand it better later. Odile said the wolf had never been slain, only shut behind a door, and that a bought curse and a curse-forged blade were kin, so that when the one broke, the other cracked with it, needing only a force great enough to throw the last of it down. And there is no force greater to an alpha than his mate choosing him freely, with the pack gone, the crown gone, death, an hour up the pass. Choosing, not the wolf, not the king, but the man. It was the last lock Selwyn had never thought to guard. The wolf came back into Corvin like a river returning to a dry bed. He turned toward the window with the gold blazing in his eyes and the horns closing in, and for the first time in 4 nights he rose to his full and terrible height, and he was grinning. "Brom," he said, and his voice had the old ring back in it, the one that could stop a crowded hall from breathing. "Open the gate. Let us give the Chancellor's hunters the welcome they rode all this way to find. What came after, Bracknir would tell in its long houses for 100 years. The hunters had climbed the pass, expecting a broken man, a frightened woman, and a soft night's work. What met them at the gate was a restored Alpha King, with his wolf riding high, his mates hard border people at his back, and a valley that had never once been afraid of high-born steel. It was finished before the moon reached its crown. The survivors knelt in the snow, and one of them, Corvin's jaws a hand's breadth from his throat, his courage entirely gone, gave up the name that had sent them and swore to say it again anywhere, to anyone as loud as they liked. They rode for the capital at dawn. Selwyn had told the pack their king was dead. It is a difficult story to keep standing when the king rides in through the gates of Highfell alive and wolf-crowned, his Luna at his side and a bound assassin at his back, naming his paymaster to every ear along the road. It came apart within the hour. Myrith came down from her high tower, the seer who had held her tongue for 19 years, and spoke at last before the full, grey court, and named the working she had witnessed, and named the man who had bought it. The whole room turned towards Selwyn like a single animal scenting blood. He did not smile his way out of that one. There was nothing left of him smooth enough to try. The Chancellor, who had hollowed a bloodline to steal a crown, was taken from the very hall he had ruled from, and Undine's northern kin, discovering with remarkable speed that they had never truly approved of any of it, went home to be very loyal and very quiet. Undine herself was gone by nightfall, and no one troubled to stop her. The winter passed without its war, and the throne the whole court had spent 3 years counting the empty days have turned out not to have been empty at all. They held a banquet in the spring. It was in the same great hall where Elira had fainted in the frost, the high hall of Highfell. The same long tables, a great many of the same faces. She walked into it on Corvin's arm, and this time she did not count the movements, and she did not hide her hand beneath a fall of grey silk. She let them look. She had spent 3 years teaching herself to vanish in that room. She was done, now and forever, with vanishing. The whispers ran ahead of her, the way they always had, but they were different whispers now. Is that her? The border girl? Look at her. Look. Because Elira of Brackenmere, Luna of Vialmore, walked the whole length of that hall, round and radiant, and entirely unhidden, the heir to the throne plain beneath her folded hands for the entire court to count, and every noble who had ever once looked straight through her now found they could not look away. Corvin stopped at the head of the hall. He made no speech. He had never needed to. He only turned to the court that had called his lion hollow, and tipped his head in that old listening way, the way that had once meant only grief, that had once so nearly cost them everything, and he smiled. For those of you who spent so long counting the silence in my house, the Alpha King said, I have news. It is not silent anymore. He laid his broad hand beside his wife's, over their child, and his gold eyes swept the hall from end to end. I can hear a second heart beating under this roof, strong, impatient, loud as a border drum. But the old helpless smile, the one that was only ever hers. My heir, let no wolf in this kingdom ever again dare tell me my house is empty. The hall came apart with the roar of it, and Elira, standing in the very place where the worst night of her life had begun, felt the small, strong drum beat on beneath their joined hands, and understood at last the whole shape of what had happened to the two of them. They had each been the other's ruin, once, in the eyes of that court. The barren bride, who had cost a king his heir, the broken king who had lost his wolf and his crown. Each of them had been handed every reason the world could invent to trade the other for something it valued more, and they had refused, both of them, every single time. He had loved her when he believed she could give him nothing at all. She had chosen him when he believed he had become nothing at all. And somewhere in the narrow space between those two refusals, a 19-year curse had died. a wolf had come home, and a child that was never meant to draw a single breath had beaten its stubborn way into the world. Neither of them had ever been anyone's first choice. They had only ever always been each other's. And that, in the end, turned out to be the whole of it. Thanks for listening. I hope this one stays with you. Here's what I want to know. Was Corvin right to try to give himself up to keep them safe? The noblest kind of wrong a man can be? Or was Elira right to refuse to let him decide he was worth less than his wolf? Tell me in the comments. I read every one, and if their story moved you, stay close. I've got another one waiting.